I've been debating for a long time about whether I should even talk about this. Part of me wants to pretend it never happened, but the other part of me knows that keeping it bottled up hasn't exactly helped. So I figured, maybe putting the story out there will finally get it off my chest. This all happened when I was a sophomore at a university somewhere in the northeastern United States. I'm not going to name the school, mostly because I'd rather stay anonymous. But I was living in a sorority house at the time, and I was majoring in English. Academics have always been pretty important to me. I'm planning on applying to law school after I graduate, so I've always taken my grades seriously. That detail matters for what happened next. During that semester, I signed up for an upper-level course about English Romanticism. It was one of those smaller classes, maybe 25 students total. Most of the people in there were juniors or seniors, so I definitely felt like one of the younger students. The professor technically ran the course, but most of the weekly discussion sessions were actually led by the teaching assistant. His name was Romer, and yes, that was the name everyone used. To this day, I have no idea if it was his first name or last name, but that's what he introduced himself as. Romer looked like he was probably in his late 20s, tall, skinny, kind of awkward. The best way I can describe his vibe is like someone who's in a band that performs at dive bars, but the band isn't very good. He wasn't creepy at first, just a little strange. The class itself was honestly pretty typical for an English course. Lots of reading, lots of talking about themes like nature, memory, emotion, classic romantic poetry stuff. But participation in the class was terrible. Most days everyone would just sit there silently while Romer waited for someone to say something. He clearly hated those long, awkward pauses. Eventually, he'd start calling on people randomly, which usually didn't go well. Half the class hadn't even done the reading, so the answers were always awkward, except for one guy. His name was Luke. Luke was tall, brown hair, pretty confident. I knew he was part of one of the bigger fraternities on campus, but that's about it. What made Luke stand out was that he knew how to break tension in the room. Whenever discussions started getting painfully quiet, he'd make a quick joke or throw in a smart comment about the reading, not in a class clown way either. It felt natural, and the thing was, he actually did the work. When he spoke, it was obvious he understood the material, so most discussion days ended up being carried by the same handful of people. Usually Luke, me, and maybe 2 or 3 others. Everyone else just sat there. Romer seemed to appreciate the people who actually talked. Whenever I made a point, he'd nod along and sometimes expand on what I said. It made me feel like I was doing something right. The first essay we had to write was about one of Wordsworth's poems. I remember I wrote about the ambiguity in Tintern Abbey. It wasn't groundbreaking or anything, but I spent a lot of time on it when I got the paper back. Romer had written a lot in the margins, not just corrections, actual feedback. He'd written full paragraphs responding to my arguments, saying things like interesting observation or great connection here. It felt encouraging, but looking back, that might have been the moment things started changing. After that essay, I started noticing Romer paying more attention to me during discussions. At first, it seemed harmless. He'd call on me more often, ask follow-up questions after I answered something. Sometimes, he'd hold eye contact a little longer than usual, I tried telling myself I was imagining things. Teaching assistants often favor certain students. That's not exactly unusual. Still, something about it felt a little strange around the same time. Something else started happening. I began running into Luke outside of class more often. Our fraternity and sorority had a lot of social overlap. We'd end up at the same mixers, the same parties, the same random campus events. And every time I looked around, Luke was there. Eventually, we just started talking more, then texting, then hanging out. After a few weeks, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner one night. I said yes. We went out a few times after that. Nothing fancy, just casual dates. Luke was easy to be around, funny, attentive, relaxed. After a while, things naturally progressed into something more physical. It wasn't some dramatic romance or anything, but I liked him. It felt simple, and honestly, college relationships usually aren't that complicated anyway. Then one afternoon, something happened that stuck in my mind. After class, I was walking across campus toward my car. As I passed behind the lecture hall, I saw Luke standing near the back of the building. He was smoking a cigarette, and standing next to him was Romer. They were talking casually, like they already knew each other. That caught me off guard. I didn't even know Luke smoked. Later that night, I asked him about it. He laughed and said he was just trying to stay on Romer's good side so he wouldn't have to stress about his grade at the end of the semester. I joked that it sounded pathetic. He shrugged and said he'd rather be pathetic than fail the class. At the time, it just felt like typical college behavior. Looking back, I wish I had paid closer attention. A few weeks later, I was staying at Luke's place one night. We had fallen asleep, watching something on his laptop. When I woke up briefly in the middle of the night, he was still asleep next to me. His phone was on the bed beside him. A YouTube video was playing quietly. I shouldn't have looked at it. I know that, but curiosity got the better of me, and honestly, when you're a college girl surrounded by frat guys, you start developing a little bit of trust issues. So I picked up the phone, I opened his photos, and almost immediately, I felt my stomach drop. There were pictures of me, a lot of them. Some were harmless, just random shots of me walking across campus or studying somewhere. But others were much more personal. Some of those photos were ones I had sent him myself, but several of them weren't. I had absolutely no memory of taking them or sending them. That part made my skin crawl. I wasn't even angry at first, just deeply uncomfortable. If he had asked me for most of those pictures, I probably wouldn't have cared. But the fact that he had them without me knowing, that felt wrong. I put the phone back where it was. I didn't wake him up. I just laid there staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what I was feeling. Confusion, embarrassment, and something else. Something heavier. But I kept it to myself, partly because I didn't want to admit I had gone through his phone, and partly because I wasn't ready to confront it yet. Week later, I was back at his place. Again, he fell asleep early, and this time I decided to check his phone again. Getting into it wasn't hard. His password was just his birthday, backwards. This time I looked deeper. Messages, deleted. Photos, everything. And that's when I found something that made my hands start shaking. Luke had been sending those pictures of me to another phone number, regularly, for weeks. Basically, the entire time we had been seeing each other. My heart was pounding so hard, thought I might throw up. I quickly took pictures of the evidence with my own phone. Then I woke him up, not gently either. I slapped him awake and demanded to know who the number belonged to. Half asleep, he started rambling about how it was just a backup phone, saying he liked having copies of things saved somewhere else. It was the most ridiculous lie I'd ever heard. I knew immediately it was nonsense, so I grabbed my stuff and walked out. Didn't even let him try to explain. The next week of my life was a blur. I barely slept. I barely ate. Eventually, the truth came out. The number Luke had been sending those pictures to belonged to Roamer. My teaching assistant. Apparently, Romer had been paying him money, hundreds of dollars, in exchange for pictures of me. The arrangement had apparently started early in the semester, maybe even before Luke and I started dating. The police got involved after everything came out. Luke admitted to it pretty quickly once they started questioning him. He was expelled from the university. Romer lost his job. I heard later that there were criminal charges involved too, but honestly, none of that really made me feel better. The whole thing just left me feeling violated. That was over a year ago now. I'm a senior now, almost finished with school. For a while, I thought I had finally moved past it, but recently, something strange started happening again. Late at night, outside my sorority house, I've started noticing the same silver sedan parked across the street, not every night, but often enough that I've started recognizing it. I've never seen anyone get in or out of the car, and maybe I'm just being paranoid, but I can't stop wondering, what if one of them is back? This next story happened about 2 weeks ago. I'm still trying to process it, honestly, but keeping it to myself has been making it worse. So I figured I'd just tell it exactly how it happened. My name is Mike, but pretty much everyone calls me Mikey. I'm 22 years old and I still live with my parents in Northern California. And before anyone pictures beaches and palm trees, let me clarify something. Not every part of California looks like that. Where I live, it actually snows. A lot. Our town is surrounded by forest, mountains, and long, empty roads. The nearest neighbor is about a 10-minute drive away. It's quiet, almost too quiet sometimes. I've been skiing since I was a kid, so the cold never really bothered me. If anything, I kind of prefer winter. But 2 weekends ago, something happened that made me start looking at my own house very differently. My parents had flown out of the country for a wedding. Some friend of my mom's was getting married in Portugal. They were going to be gone for the whole weekend. I wasn't invited, which honestly didn't bother me at all. A few days alone in the house sounded great. Our place is pretty basic. 3 bedrooms, 1 floor, nothing fancy. My parents' bedroom is at one end of the hallway. My room is at the opposite end. Between them is a spare room we mostly use to store random stuff. The living room and kitchen sit in the middle of the house, and the front door opens directly into the living room. The layout matters for what happened the first night alone was completely normal. I stayed up late playing video games and watching YouTube, then finally went to bed around 2 in the morning. I fell asleep almost instantly. The second night was different. I went to bed around the same time, maybe a little earlier because I was tired. I remember knocking out really quickly, but at some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. I have no idea what time it was. All I know is something had pulled me out of sleep. Normally, I sleep straight through the night, so this immediately felt strange. My phone was on airplane mode, so it wasn't a notification or anything like that. At first, I just laid there in the darkness, trying to figure out what woke me. The room was completely dark. Then, as my eyes slowly adjusted, I noticed something. My closet door was open. Now, that might sound like nothing, but here's the thing. I always close my closet door before I go to sleep. Every single night. It's a weird habit I've had since I was a kid. I hate leaving closet doors open in the dark. And my closet has one of those sliding doors that doesn't stay shut unless you push it closed all the way. So seeing it wide open immediately made my stomach twist. Knew I hadn't left it like that. My brain started doing that thing where it tries to convince you everything is normal. Maybe you forgot. Maybe you opened it earlier. Maybe it just slid open. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My heart started beating faster without really thinking. I reached over to my nightstand and grabbed my phone. Then I turned on the flashlight. The second the light hit the room, I screamed. Standing right next to my bed were two people, two figures. They had been standing there, silently in the dark. The moment the light came on, they bolted. They moved incredibly fast, like they had been expecting it. One darted toward the door, while the other moved the opposite direction for a second before following. I'd swung the flashlight around, trying to see their faces, but they were too quick. Something clattered onto the floor during the chaos, but I didn't even look. I just started yelling. I don't even know what I was shouting. Probably just pure panic. The two figures sprinted out of my room and down the hallway. Without thinking, I jumped out of bed and ran after them. By the time I reached the hallway, I heard the front door slam. I ran into the living room, but they were already gone. The house was silent again. I stood there, shaking, trying to catch my breath. My brain was still trying to process what had just happened. Two strangers had been standing over my bed while I slept. After a few seconds, survival instincts finally kicked in. I ran back into my room, locked the door, and called 911 while I was waiting for the police. I turned my bedroom light on. That's when I looked down at the floor and saw what had fallen. It was one of my mom's kitchen knives, a big one. I nearly threw up. Those people had been standing there, holding a knife while I slept. If I hadn't woken up when I did, I honestly don't know if I'd be here telling this story. The police showed up about 20 minutes later. They searched the property, checked around the house, and walked through every room. But whoever those people were, they were long gone. The officers asked me a bunch of questions and wrote everything down. Eventually, one of them said something that annoyed me. He suggested that I probably forgot. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere. Every window was locked. Every door except the front one was locked, so the only explanation was that the front door must have been unlocked. Told him I was pretty sure I had locked it, but he just shrugged and repeated the same thing. Eventually, they left. The next day, my parents came home and gave me the exact same lecture about locking doors. But the thing is, I know I locked that door, and even if I didn't, why would two burglars stand silently over someone's bed? with a knife. If they wanted to rob the place, they could have just done it while I slept. That's the part that still doesn't make sense, and honestly, it's the part that keeps me up at night. But the last story is the one that still scares me the most. My name is Natasha. I'm 23, and this started about 3 months ago, right after I broke up with my boyfriend. At the time, I had just moved into my first apartment by myself. It was nothing fancy, just a small one-bedroom in a medium-sized apartment complex in Columbus, Ohio. I work remotely, so I spend a lot of time at home. That's actually why I wanted my own place. No roommates, no noise, just quiet. The apartment was on the second floor, facing the parking lot. Not exactly a beautiful view, but I didn't really care. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal. I didn't know anyone in the building besides a quick nod to neighbors here and there. Then, one evening, I noticed someone. I was coming back from the gym around 8 at night as I walked up the stairs. A guy was walking down. He looked like a completely average guy, maybe late 30s or early 40s, gray hoodie, average height. Nothing about him really stood out. We did that awkward thing where both people move the same direction in the hallway. Then he squeezed past me and kept walking. I forgot about it almost immediately. A few days later, I saw him again. This time he was standing near the dumpsters in the parking lot, just standing there. When I looked in his direction, he quickly walked away around the side of the building. Still, nothing that weird, but the third time made me uneasy. I was working at my desk one afternoon when I glanced out the window. There was a navy blue sedan parked in the lot. Someone was sitting inside it, and they were looking toward my building, possibly even my window. I couldn't see their face clearly, so I tried to ignore it. But after that, started noticing him more often. The same guy, the same car, sometimes walking through the lot, sometimes sitting in the sedan. Always somewhere with a view of my apartment. Tried convincing myself I was imagining things. Maybe he lived there. Maybe our schedules just overlapped, but then something happened that I couldn't explain. One evening, I stopped at a Chipotle I usually visit after the gym. It's about 15 minutes from my apartment in a totally different part of town. I was sitting there eating alone when I looked up and saw him, the same guy, sitting across the restaurant, eating a burrito bowl. My stomach instantly dropped. There was no logical reason he should be there, and the worst part, every few seconds he glanced in my direction. Not obvious staring, just quick looks, enough that I could feel it. When I got up to leave, he started gathering his things, too. I walked straight to my car and locked the doors. Then I drove home using a weird route, constantly checking my mirrors. I didn't see anyone following me, but when I got back to my apartment, I sat in the dark watching the parking lot for almost an hour. Eventually, I convinced myself I had overreacted until the next morning when I looked out the window and saw the blue sedan parked there again. That's when I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the car was gone. A week later, something even worse happened. I woke up and found a piece of paper slid under my door. It was a handwritten note. It said only one sentence: "You should really close your blinds at night." 2 weeks later, I moved out. I broke my lease, paid the penalty, and moved back in with my parents. I thought that was the end of it, until a month later, when I was driving home from the gym near my parents' house and saw the same navy blue sedan parked 2 blocks away. I recognized it instantly, and that's the moment I realized something terrifying. Whoever that man is, he might still be watching me. He might still be watching me.